As a fan of the game Cyberpunk 2077, I was cautiously optimistic for Cyberpunk Edgerunners, because while I am a gigantic fan of the world of Night City, I have a huge dislike for most anime. To me, a lot of anime either has generic plotlines with copy and paste characters, or is just filled with fan service at inappropriate times. So I feared this show would follow the path of many animes I have seen and be more like Dress Up Darling than Neon Genesis. Luckily for me, this show happens to be on the Evangelion side of anime, with actual adult themes. Just to begin, you can't not mention the art style in this show. It perfectly emulates the slick, neon-coloured world seen in Cyberpunk. The character designs are all well made in a way where just by looking at the character, you know their personality. This is great as well, because character designs change as the series goes on to better complement the character's arc. The music in the show is excellent, mostly because the music in Cyberpunk 2077 was excellent, and the music is ripped straight from the game. However, I did have an issue with the overuse of certain songs. I assume the creators had access to the entire Cyberpunk soundtrack, but they only stick to 2 main songs, which, to be fair, are bangers, but are slightly overused at times. The main character David seems like your generic anime protagonist at first, a schoolboy who is given magical powers who must join a team of wacky characters. But the show develops David into a much more realistic approach of how someone would act in a place like Night City. Another amazing standout in the cast is Lucy. At first, they also seem like your stereotypical hot anime waifu, but over time, they begin to build a believable relationship with David. However, after this, the character roster gets a lot weaker, because the show doesn't really have time to develop its characters, leading to characters like Rebecca, a character who never progresses past the childlike stereotype commonplace in many anime. While I have seen love for this character, I personally can't relate to a character whose whole personality revolves around being the crazy one. The saddest thing of all is that the show already had a way in which they could improve Rebecca's character, because something happens to someone close to them, but it's never brought up again. The way in which episodes are laid out is also a tiny bit confusing, because at some points there will be big emotional moments which cap off episodes, and are then seemingly completely forgotten about by the start of the next episode, other than a quick one-line reference to it later on in the episode. And this really affected my enjoyment of the show, because when these characters barely react to these big moments, there's now no reason why me as an audience member should care. Another issue this show has is to do with the powers of the characters. A lot of the time, the powers are quite high concept, and at certain times it is difficult to keep track of what is happening. It reminded me of JoJo in a lot of ways, where there's all these weirdly named abilities that are hard to explain. Along with that, there are a few fight scenes that are a bit goofy. These are ones where a character throws 1,000 punches in a few seconds, and the other one is one where David uses their power to slow down time and drive a car in a ridiculous way. A thing I respected this show for was the use of nudity. Most animes, if they were to use nudity, would use it in a way that makes the audience horny. But here, it's very tastefully done, for the most part. The fact that it also takes place in a city where sex is commonplace makes the use of it a lot more natural than if it was used in a slice of life show about high schoolers. The best episode by far for me had to be the 5th episode. It had by far the most interesting concept, following a person who creates snuff films that you can experience in an advanced form of VR. It was a surprisingly tense episode, and there was some great action that ended in a really unexpected way. The worst episode is by far the 4th episode, because it's basically just a training arc that isn't all that fun to watch. Luckily, it only lasts for half of the episode, and the rest of the episode has some decent exploration of David's and Lucy's relationship. The ending to this show really brings everything together. Without it, the show would just be an okay shonen series. It has so much stakes and leaves all the important characters in a situation that seems impossible to solve. However, I did find the villain a bit generic, and they didn't really have much of a reason for doing what they did. An issue I had with this show is the pacing. 1 second, David is in school. Next thing you know, they're part of a gang. Next thing you know, they're an expert with their augmentations. Although I do complain about training arcs, they exist for a reason, and in this case, we needed at least one scene of David learning how to use this advanced technology, instead of them just running, and that's all. I think overall, this show's main characters are quite good, but the quality of the show is weighed down by all the stereotypical characters who don't get enough development, and some of the pacing being too fast for what is happening. To see my final rating, skip to this timestamp, because from here on out, I'll be talking spoilers. I just have to start by mentioning how amazing Adam Smasher was in this. That character was basically made to be an anime villain, so them being so cool really lived up to my expectations. The arc of David in this show was incredible. It shows how logically someone can go cyber psycho. It isn't something that happens with one implant, it's something that takes months, if not years, of not just physical changes, but also mental changes. It isn't the only interesting thing about their arc, because their romantic relationship with Lucy is very well done and paced perfectly in the show. Nothing happens too fast. We learn more about the character when it feels right. The only issue I had with this arc centres around their boring backstory. When their mother dies, I just do not care, because I barely know them. We have 2 scenes with them before they die, and it just feels like it wasn't something the writers put much thought into. The same goes for them attending school. It is something that seems to be there just because most animes have a main character who goes to school, but this doesn't fit with David's character in the slightest. And I understand it's pointed out in the show that David doesn't fit in the academy, but it's never really explained how a non-corpo even got into the school, other than his mom had some involvement that is never shown. I think the show would definitely be improved if the school aspect was completely removed. The way I see it is that people in Night City don't need a tragic backstory to be part of this team of mercenaries, because this is just a place where crime is normalised, so it gets annoying when everyone gets a tragic backstory for no reason. The death of Maine was very poorly handled in my opinion. It only existed to give David a reason to follow someone's dreams for them, something that was already achieved by the mother. This was the thing I mentioned earlier that was completely ignored the following episode. We barely get any time to see David or anyone mourn Maine in the slightest, and it makes the audience not care, because if the characters aren't affected by someone's death, why should you? I think overall, this series is a 6.5 out of 10, because many of the episodes can be unrelated to the overall plot, and it leads to the audience unsure of what parts of the plot they should be focused on. If you'd like to see more reviews of other movie and TV show related content, subscribe and leave a like to let YouTube know you enjoyed the video.